Good evening and welcome to the Development Review Commission on May 22nd. They're not on. All right, can you hear me now? We're having a technical difficulty apparently. All right. Welcome to the Development Review Commission of May 22nd. Let me start with the introduction of commission members. To my left is Andrew Johnson, Phil Amorosi, and Tom Brown. I'm Chair Linda Spears. From staff, we have Cynthia Jared, Lee Jimenez, and Suparna Datsgupta. The first item on our agenda is approval of the minutes for the April 24th meeting.
So moved.
Been moved by Commissioner DiDomenico, second. Then seconded by Commissioner Amorosi. All those in favor? Opposed? That passes 7-0. The next item on our agenda, number 4, is on the consent agenda. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address this issue? I hear you. You're going in and out. I can't do anything about it. I'm sorry.
It's on the consent agenda. Would you like to hear anybody here?
You want? I'm sorry. So there's someone here that would like to address number 4. So we'll go ahead and hear that case.
Madam Chair, they are going to come back and look at the connections again.
All right. So we'll take a brief recess.
This is the precision case. This is the precision case one? Okay.
As so I have the people who would like to speak on number 5, Deborah, Trevor, and Darlene, and I have one that has no name on it. So if you plan to speak on item number 5, you need to have your name. Philip?
Is that you? Are you sending somebody? Okay. 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 It's a technical issue, I guess. It's coming in and out, but they can't do anything about that at this point. I guess everybody needs to speak a little bit louder. They said they can hear it, but it's like the members of the audience said it's coming, there's something else going on.
I'd recommend for those of you in the audience, you move up closer. We'll try and speak up as much as we can, but it'll help if you're closer to us.
Test.
Okay, so we will hear Precision Fleet Services. So if staff would like to make an application.
Good evening, Commission, Madam Chair Spears, Vice Chair Lyon. Precision Fleet Services is a licensed car dealer that operates a dealership on 3 parcels using the common address of 1941 East 3rd Street, located in the GID General Industrial District. The project consists of 3 non-subdivided parcels east of South Perry Lane, south of East 3rd Street, and west of South Smith Street. The current dealership, with its offices, buildings, and other improvements, sits primarily on 2 of the smaller parcels fronting South Perry. A small portion of the active dealership utilizes the larger parcel to the east for access and for a portion of the building improvements, except for the pavement and fencing. The larger parcel is the site of the new development and is currently used as overflow parking for vehicles from the existing facility. On August 8th, as you recall, the Development Review Commission approved a use permit and a development plan review for an earlier design of tonight's request. The previous design consisted of 161,000 square feet of ground level and lower level warehouse and garage, and 13,000 square feet of above ground two-story office. The project's new design is now a 266,000 industrial building consisting of 14,150 square feet of two-story office and around 252,000 square feet of three-story warehouse slash garage. The applicant is requesting a planned area development to increase the maximum building height from 35 feet to 55 feet to maximize the presentation, storage, and effective sales of their vehicle inventory. The height of the office section is primarily 33 feet 10 inches tall, with exception to the main entrance tower section, which sits at around 38 feet 10 inches tall. The height of the warehouse garage section, which stands with the parapet primarily at 46 feet 4 inches tall, with exception to the stairwell and elevator towers, which stand at approximately 52 feet 10 inches tall, and the upper level ramp and its screening along the north elevation, which stands at 54 feet 4 inches tall. So a new use permit is required for the new design because of the additional floor area of the proposed site, as well as the new development plan review. The dealership is considered a traditional car lot, but offers online sales as well as wholesales and other dealers. Inventory is typically obtained through trade-ins, wholesale purchases from other dealers and auctions. The dealership will operate from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. on weekdays and 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Saturdays. It will employ staff of mechanics, service people, salespeople, administrative staff. Currently, it approximately employs 30 individuals and is expected to increase by 50% with this new expansion. The building is positioned lengthwise along East 3rd Street and is set back 25 feet from 3rd Street and Smith Road. The office portion and the main entrance will be located along Smith, while the warehouse area will primarily front 3rd Street. New driveways are provided on the west end of the 3rd Street frontage and the south end of the Smith Road frontage. Surface parking is set back 25 feet from both streets and provided along the south and west portions of the lot area. A rolling vehicle gate will be provided at the 3rd Street driveway, and refuse enclosures will be located to the south of the building. The primary building material, it consists of tilt-up concrete panels. Architectural interests are primarily provided along the perimeter of the office section along Smith Road. Horizontal and vertical reveal patterns will be created within the concrete tilt panels to allow for color variations. Vertical bands will be provided to reduce the horizontal length and provide undulation along the parapet. Large clear windows are provided at the two-story main entrance and adorned with yellow metal awnings. Windows are provided along the perimeter of the office section on the 1st and 2nd floors. Clear story windows are provided along the perimeter of the warehouse area, with emergency exits provided approximately every other tilt-up concrete panel, and the roll-up doors are provided along the south elevation. All doors will be painted to match the primary background building color. As you'll see, an extension of the parapet along the north elevation is used to screen the ramp area at the top level of the 3rd level of the garage. This portion of the extended parapet will be adorned with architectural screening feature, which consists of perforated metal with a minimum 1-inch openings and painted to match the accent color of the building. Here's a view of the cross section of the garage warehouse area. And here's another cross section. And here are the floor plans of the garage warehouse area. This is the 1st level, intermediate level, and then the upper level. As you can see, the ramp is shown on the north end. And then here we have the office floor plan, the first, second level, and then the roof plan. Approximately 31,000 square feet of landscape will be provided, equating to a coverage of 19.8%. 21 trees will be installed along the street frontage in addition to the 9 existing trees. The landscape vegetation consists of 3 species of trees, consisting of Desert Museum, Palo Verde, Siso, and Swan Hill. 8 ground covers will be provided, consisting of Mexican Bird of Paradise, Orange Jubilee, Red Yucca, Desert Spoon, Baja Ruelia, Gold Mountain Lantana, Trailing Rosemary, and Blue Elf Aloe. All landscape surface areas will be covered with 1/2-inch Madison Gold decomposed granite, 2 inches deep and accented with 3 by 3 by 3 foot granite boulders along the landscape frontage areas. A neighborhood meeting is required for the PAD and was held on April 11th, 2018 from 6 to 7 p.m. at Precision Fleet Services' existing facility located at 1941 East 3rd Street. The meeting was held as a group presentation with a question and answering segment at the end. One person who owns the 2 properties immediately south of the proposed site attended the meeting. He expressed his oppositions to the proposed height and indicated that he may seek legal protest for the project. To date, the only public input activity has been inquiries by the person in opposition and his legal counsel regarding the legal protest process. For further processing, the applicant will be required to seek approval for a subdivision plat to combine the parcels adjacent to the west and move the western property line of the new development. So as indicated in the staff report, staff believes that this application meets all the approval criteria for the PAD, the use permit, and the DPR, and supports this request subject to the conditions of approval provided in the staff report. And I'll be available should you have any questions. I think based on their application, they indicated that they had the ability to provide solar panels atop. However, I don't think the conduit portion is included in the scope of work, but I'm sure the applicant can expand on that when they come up to speak on their behalf.
Other questions? Anyone? Thank you. If the applicant would like to make a presentation at this time.
Hello, I'm David Folk with Colley Architects. I'm the project director for this project. We are officially the applicants, but up here with us is also the owner, Chris Finn, and he'd like to speak a few words, if you would.
Sure. My name is Chris Finn. I'm the owner of PFS. We've been in business in Tempe since 2008. We're really looking forward to building our new place and really developing the entire property, not just the east side, but the west side as well once we're done. We think it'll increase jobs, revenue, and really increase our presence in the area. I was born and raised in Mesa, went to ASU, played football in the 90s there at ASU, played in a Rose Bowl, have a lot of ties to the community, and again, we're really looking forward to building our new place.
And I'm outside general counsel for Adam Decker for Precision for the project.
Regarding the design, David Folk again with Colley Architects. Regarding the design for this particular project, the goal, as you have mentioned, is providing an interior car sales service. So providing an enclosed environment so that there was the opportunity to provide tempered space for both the vehicles and for the customers to observe the vehicles is the primary goal of this facility, as well as additional parking on the rooftop that would be exposed. The sales offices and corporate offices would be attached as well as they have made their position in the community, so they have chosen to just relocate their business from the other property just south of that existing business on this lot. With that, they have recognized that they are trying to maintain as a good neighbor relationship, moving the building furthest as they can to Smith Road in an attempt to make sure they have adequate circulation as well as building separations. So we have the opportunity, if we kept the building closer, we do have a zero lot line, in which case we could have pushed the building further to the south. We have placed it further to the north to give it a more open space around the building. But the reason we are approaching for the height variance is get the structural ability and capacity for some of these garage spaces, as well as a large enough kind of showroom space in the main garage. We are looking for an increase in the height. However, per the way the city actually measures the height of this structure, the technical height would be, in our construction document approach, would be the 46 feet 4 inches for the parapet. The other height that we have included in our PAD request is really for the appurtenances, the elevator overruns, the stair overruns, which are allowed to go over the top of the building height. So our approach is that we're really looking for these 46 feet 4 inches as our true height of the building. The city requested that we go ahead and put the full 55 feet on there, and we're more than welcome. We want to be open and transparent as to what is the building and the nature of the building. On top of that, our allowed height would be 35 feet, and if the city so granted, we could do an administrative height of 38 feet 6 inches. So roughly, we're looking at possibly a 6 foot to 6'5", 6'6" increase over and above what would be the traditional building height should the city grant us an administrative review. So we feel it's fairly close to what the city is approaching, and trying to be good neighbors in terms of our setbacks and how we've located the site has been our main purpose. We've also tried to tie in the colors and the pedestrian ways and the landscape around the building, and finding it an accomplished and an appropriate building within this industrial GID zoning. And we're open to other questions if you have any.
Could you answer the question? Can you answer the question about the electrical conduit being up on the roof to support the photovoltaic cells? So that way it's really ready for them, since you're building the building?
Right. Well, if we were to come back and ask for the solar panels on it, the conduits would be run down whatever vertical supports they have and transported into a power grid internal to the building. So I don't believe it would be over and above the structures themselves. It would just be an integral part into the vertical steel support that would then support any photovoltaic cells on top of the canopies. If that answers your question.
So you don't see it as an extra cost further down the road rather than doing it now?
Oh, you mean putting in the conduits at
Yeah.
that point? We would have to work that out with the owner because we need to make sure, but at this point, without the full design of putting the photovoltaic up there, we would probably not put it in there. We would be able to core drill through the slabs and extend that conduit and networking of wires underneath the roof deck into the main part of the building. Yeah.
Commissioner DiDomenico.
Did I understand the parking structure or the showroom, if you will, is that going to be air-conditioned space?
It's going to be evap cooled, but based on the type of evap cool we'll have in there, it'll be significantly cooler than the exterior environment. So it'll be anywhere between 70 and 90 degrees in there, depending on how many times they roll up the doors or roll in. Our desire is not to be a huge energy consumer, so we're trying to work with an appropriate level of cooling in there.
Commissioner Brown.
On the color rendering, the 4 foot by 4 foot windows into the garage are rendered with the same blue. That's the same blue glass, correct?
Correct.
Okay. The floor to floor height from the second to the rooftop is about 13 feet, but the floor to floor height from the ground floor to the second floor is 27 feet. And so you're talking a lot about heights. Is there any
So
reason
the interior clear height would be 24 feet from the
Yes.
slab to the bottom of the structure?
Yes,
correct?
why so high? That seems to be part of your height question mark, and it doesn't actually increase your number of cars at all.
Correct. Part of it is to make sure it doesn't feel like a parking garage by elevating the ceiling, getting it significantly above it, as well as being able to give views from inside the office space down into that lower level, so that they'd be able to view from the work base inside the main offices. There's windows along that system for the sales team to be able to view into the garage. And then if the building owner should want to remove himself from this particular business, he would be able to have someone use it as a traditional warehouse if they really wanted to.
Thank you.
Seeing none, we'll go ahead and open this up for public comment, and then you'll have a chance to respond.
All right, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
So I have one individual, David Labus.
Good evening. My name is David Labus. I own the building at 1980 5th Street, directly south of this project. I am authorized to speak on behalf of the 4 parcels that are to the south of this. They are out of town, not able to attend this meeting. Prior to filing a legal protest, we thought we might be able to come and work some of these issues out. First of all, I'd like to commend the development of this project. Property's been vacant for quite some time. We have a lot of transients in the area. The major concern was actually twofold. As this brochure came out and the neighboring property owners that I spoke to, they're under the impression that the building's 89,000 feet because it mentions building area, square feet of building area. Well, in fact, it's 250,000 square feet. So it's much larger than what, I don't want to say it's misleading, but it's larger than what the proposed description says. The main concern, and I think Commission Member Brown brought it up, was the height of this project. We are looking at this building spanning across 4 properties at a height of, well, depending on who you speak to, 44 to 50 feet. And then if you look at the application, I think it goes up as high as 60 feet. Our concern was you have property rights under the GID. You have an existing height limitation, I believe, is 35 feet. And at 35 feet, most warehouses in this area have about a 14-foot clear, some as high as 16-foot clear. So to go as high as 24 foot on just your first floor really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And it just adds to the overall height of this building. Oh, okay, I didn't know I was limited to say. So my second issue is I am told there's going to be somewhere between 700 and 800 cars here. We now have 4 or 5 different car dealerships in the area. There's no accommodation for offloading of vehicles on transports. Currently, most of the dealerships use the public streets, and they're just now being overloaded. And if we're going to have 500, 600, 700, 800 cars coming here, that's a lot of car transports using public streets to load and offload.
Do you have any other issues?
No.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Just a second, Commissioner Amorosi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What is the nature of your business just south of their building?
We have a door and trim shop in part of it, and the other part of the building is a service center for a car dealer, for cars. The other businesses are a environmental cleanup business. To the west of that, excuse me, to the east of that would be the honey, and I don't know what the other portion of their business is. To the east, to the west of us is a air conditioning manufacturing, not manufacturing, supply facility.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else in the audience wishing to address this issue? Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing. If the applicant would like to address the issue of the offloading, the number of cars, and the
Yes, David Falk with Kelly Architects. So the question that was brought up about the comment card that was sent out was a request on footprint of the ground floor plane. So the ground floor plane is what is the 89,000 square feet. It is approximately 200 and some thousand square feet as a total building, but it was not an attempt to mislead. The building has not changed, correct? Yeah. Regarding the height, again, I think we kind of discussed the building is seeking as a building applicant for a construction document or a building permit plan review phase. Our official submittal would be 46 feet, 4 inches as a height of the building, matching the parapet height. And the appurtenances that do go above, again, are not really considered part of the height variations or height limits. Okay?
Sure, so it's the same thing that we do now. We currently have over 400 cars on our lot now, so we'll have about 50% more cars. The offloading is normally done on 3rd Street. So this is Smith that you're looking at there. 3rd Street is just to the south of that, and it's not a heavily trafficked area. They park on the side, they offload it. They're in and out in 20 minutes, 30 minutes. So there hasn't been a problem up to this point, and we've been there for over 7 years now.
You mentioned you didn't want it to feel like a parking garage. Do customers, individual customers like me, come in here and test drive a car?
Sure.
Do we test drive it in the garage or out in the street?
On the street.
So the experience of being trapped in the garage might be not so bad if it was 4 or even 6 feet lower?
I guess that's a matter of opinion. I would vote for the higher one. I've had warehouses that have been 16, 20, 24, and the aesthetic value of the showroom looks a lot better the higher that it is. I own a property in Peoria, and we're at 24 and 26 clear, and it looks great. I think the other thing too is that down the road, if I decide to get out of the car business or whatever, I like for the building to have multiple uses or multiple potential uses, and the lower that you make the clear, then the less opportunities that you have for warehousing.
Thank you.
I wonder if you'd be willing to tell us from business point of view what the advantage of having an enclosed building is as opposed to an open garage.
Sure. Have you ever gone to look for a car in the middle of summer on an open lot? That's the main one. Cars are inside. They're 30 degrees, 40 degrees cooler, especially in the summer. They stay cleaner, and it's a nicer presentation too. And the clients can walk up and down, get in and out of cars without burning their hands or sweating their behind off.
Okay. Yeah, my assumption was that cleaning was a big part of it.
Sure.
Obviously, the temperature is an issue, but you're going to be spending a lot of juice to condition such a large space. So I didn't know if that was as much of a driver for you financially.
Sure. Yeah. Yes and no. Sometimes the swamp coolers just make it stickier, and it doesn't really cool it off. So it really is being in the shade. We'll have big, huge fans in there as well to circulate the air, but it really is just being in the shade.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Summers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The main issue that I think we're hearing today is height, and given the location in a general industrial district, I mean, typically when we hear concerns about height, it's because it's a residential area. Someone can see into the backyard. There's concerns about the intensity of the use and the noise it might generate in a residential area. I guess I don't see that here, and if it's a building of this height is not suitable in GID, I'm not sure where it should go. There's also the revenue implications of this kind of use, which for auto sales are pretty significant for the city. So for that reason, I'm happy to support the project.
Vice Chair Lyon.
Yeah, I have similar feelings. I don't view the height as a very significant problem, and it sounds to me like it is driven by a good business model that makes sense as a way to sell cars, particularly in this hot valley. My one kind of quibble is I wish that the northeast corner was a little more of a presentation face, because I feel like that's the side we're going to see, and the building kind of turns its back a little bit on that side of the street. But that's not enough to make me oppose the project. I'll be voting for it.
Other comments? Commissioner Brown.
I was surprised to hear that offloading on the street is no big deal. The times that I've had that experience of passing a truck that's unloading cars, it's pretty darn annoying. And I guess if you were still up at the podium, I'd ask you what percentage of auto dealerships in Tempe you think typically do this. You have a great driveway. I like the way you put the parking behind the building, and I don't see why you couldn't offload on your own parking lot.
And I would say I actually drive through this area, and I've never even noticed it. You know, you see it around where you have big car dealerships,
I guess it's common practice. I didn't realize that it was no big deal.
well, again, because we have approved other dealerships.
Right. I guess I have a question for the staff. Is every business allowed to unload their lumber and their product on the street daily or weekly?
I think that's more a question directed to transportation as far as what's allowed on a certain street type of the street and what the capabilities are as far as loading, unloading, and especially also the time of day when the merchandise is unloaded or loaded onto trucks. But as you recall, this site does have an actual use permit entitled to it for the same use that is can be extended before before the expiration of that use permit approval. So I just wanted to make note of that as well.
Yeah, I'm going back to the height issue, and I actually appreciate the height, and I like the idea that there's so many parking garages around here, and if there were, I don't see any other use for those if we were to move beyond everyone owning 1 to 2 cars. So I appreciate that they're opening up the opportunity for reuse of this building with some other type of use. So I'll be supporting it.
Any other comments? I was just going to say I also appreciate the reuse ability of the building with this young. With that, I'll entertain a motion. Vice Chair Lyon.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve PL 180002 Precision Fleet Services.
Passes 6-1 with Commissioner Brown in the dissent. The next item on our agenda is the Character Area 3 plan.
All right, Madam Chair, Commissioners, Hunter Hansen, Community Development. I've been project manager with the Character Area Planning process. First, thank you for your time, and I wanted to thank the members of the public that have been involved with our 2-year planning process. So the next 10 slides, we'll do 4 things. First, we're going to do a quick background. Then we'll do an overview of the contents, how the document is structured organizationally. Then we'll do a quick summary of each one of the anchors throughout the planning area. And then finally, we'll outline next steps. So diving right in. In early 2016, under council direction, we started work on Character Area Plan 3 at the conclusion of both Alameda and Apache. So unlike those areas, in a word, this area has changed. Right now, there are just over 34,000 people, 11,000 households, 14 neighborhood associations, and 16 homeowner associations. And by 2040, citywide, we're expecting over 83,000 new residents and 47,000 new jobs. Now, not all of those are projected to be within this planning area, but the lion's share of the growth for the city, you can imagine, will be happening along the lake, in the downtown, and throughout the Novus district. So this area has undergone an exhaustive public outreach campaign, including workshops, online surveys, social media engagement, We did a direct door hanger to every household. We had a series of local meetups and locally owned restaurants and businesses. And of course, everything we did this year for the first time, including the Dotocracy and voting, has been available electronically. The last point to make here is that this advances the goals of the General Plan 2040, which was ratified by voters. The General Plan specifically calls out for the development of character area plans, and Council approved the boundaries for each one of those plans prior to commencement on work. So the document is broken up into 4 distinct anchors, which are the section that includes the design guidelines and placemaking principles. And before that, we have an overview, which includes an introduction as well as area-wide guidelines that apply to the area as a whole. In the overview section this time, we did something a little different. One of the things we've had to continually communicate and communicate better is the scope of work for a character area plan. There's a huge difference between a design guideline and a legal obligation in the form of, say, a zoning ordinance or a formal zoning overlay. And so we've been very careful to parse out the scope of work for what is a character area plan, what falls outside of the scope of work for a character area plan, and how to continually communicate the difference between a guideline and a law. So that section spends some time with some charts and graphs to identify the scope of work. The last section in the introduction is an area-wide focus, which includes landscape transect and other details we'll get into here in a moment. So one of the overarching kind of key considerations for any character area plan really is this connection to place. We hosted a conference at the Arizona State Historic Preservation Conference this last fall, and we talked about the role of placemaking in communities and preservation and how it's integrally tied to art and sense of pride and sense of belonging. And more than just being good design, it's really rooted in a meaningful connection that people make to the places they inhabit. So you'll see that thread throughout the document here when we talk about integrated art, when we talk about some of our oldest subdivisions, including the Gage Edition and Park Tract, which is in now common day Maple Ash neighborhood. We really want to tie people to the place and the people that came before them. So we spent some time profiling the place names, which include the names of the parks, the street names, some of our famous buildings. You can imagine that kind of laundry list there. We also spent some time profiling the prehistoric history in Tempe. This character area, it's more important to do that than any other character area. You can imagine that South Tempe would be, there's not much to talk about in terms of prehistory. But we also profiled the Mexican-American history and the Hispanic history in the early settlement patterns in Tempe, knowing that everything kind of focused around Hayden Butte and now common downtown area. So we spent some time kind of with the museum and our preservation staff really outlining what that meant and using the right names to tie people to the place. So you'll see that thread throughout the entire document. Okay, jumping to each section has color-coded tabs. And we start with the green tab, which is the area-wide guidelines and principles. That includes sections A1 through A5. Those are the Tempe streets, the landscape transect, the historic and cultural preservation section, a profile of all of the character-defining features of the Tempe Hayden Butte Preserve, as well as we worked with city staff and members of the Commission for Sustainability on the Sustainable Tempe portion. And in that section, we profiled resources, programs, green infrastructure, water management, heat management, and the triple bottom line with the equity, economy, and the environment. So you'll see guidelines in those sections that support our general plan goals and objectives. And another thing that is kind of the common thread that we see throughout here is the role of shade and walkability, which really kind of translates to livability. ASU just recently published a study saying that we have the potential by the year 2030, which is not that far from now, we have the potential for 45 days each summer to be over 120 degrees. So more than just good planning practices, this really affects human health and everything from ground floor programming to economic development, walkability, support of public transportation. You'll see all those kind of outlined in the area-wide piece because that's really the connective tissue that pulls all of the anchors together. All right, the Northwest neighborhoods have self-identified that way since the 1990s. There were early planning efforts done that identified our group of neighbors in the northwest area of Tempe. This includes everything from Gentilly, just immediately west of ASU, University Park, and two others just south of there, the greater Maple Ash section, and Mitchell Park, Clark Park, and then to the north, Linden Park. And we often get the question, why did we include this little kind of nodule west of Priest? Well, if you look at a map, if you look at an aerial, that's the only residential piece that's west of Priest. So we included that not only because they self-identify with the northwest neighborhoods, but if you look around them, everything is basically industrial. So if we're describing the character of an area and their sense of belonging, it made sense to group them with a neighborhood piece with the northwest neighbors than when we do future planning efforts for West Tempe. So the neighbors and residents throughout the northwest neighborhoods were really active and engaged throughout this process. We hosted 4 meetings within the neighborhood in addition to the area-wide focus meetings. And the framework for the section really came from, which goes from Northwest 1 through NW1 through NW9, really came from our early outreach in identifying the key vision pieces, the key character-defining elements, and the key priorities for the Northwest neighbors. So we have a one-to-one correlation of what we asked people was important and how the document is organized. And that's really important because it's the strength of the document. We also mapped these character-defining characteristics, the neighborhood characteristics, which is the map on the bottom there. And the map includes things like the historic resources, the flood irrigation, our cultural resources, and our pre- and post-war subdivisions. Now, you'll notice that each one of these components is represented by some neighborhoods throughout the area. For example, Gentilly has flood irrigation, surprisingly, so does Roosevelt Edition. Many of these neighborhoods share proximity to ASU in common. Many of them, most of them, exhibit post-war context for subdevelopment and period of build-out and significance, in addition to the kind of the historic landscape palette. So these are the things that all of these neighborhoods share in common. Now, certainly, the neighborhoods like common day or modern day Maple Ash share the greatest concentration of those character-defining elements. So we've made specific mention of that in the neighborhood overview to show that not only when we identify kind of placemaking considerations for each one of these components, that we're not just singling out one neighborhood because those elements exist throughout the entire area, which is an argument why we included them as one area to begin with. In a word, if I could just kind of personally summarize the intent that we're hearing from the neighbors on this piece is that if our plan, or any plan for that matter, is successful, it will balance future growth with the feel, the setting, the association, the context of the neighborhood. You know, these neighbors are really concerned that we see a lot of large, huge scale growth in the downtown and ASU coming. They want some degree of assurance that the transitions are managed well, that the neighborhood infill projects fit the character and the feeling and the setting of the neighborhoods. So if our plan is successful, it will do that thing. And I feel like the design guidelines in this plan have done the best job of any city document we've done to that effort. Okay, moving to the downtown. The document, in addition to having kind of annotated placemaking principles, we also use a lot of maps and photos. We know that we're a visual society, so we have a lot of photos that have been used throughout the document. For example, when we talk about getting the ground floor right, we break it out into different sections. So we talk about human health, we talk about the pedestrian realm, we talk about the role of public art, shaded walkways, and then the physical design of that podium piece, so that we're not walking against a 14-story glass building in the downtown, that we have some sense of human scaled activity at the podium level. The section on design matters drills down onto the quality design standards. We talk about, again, the podium level, open space treatments, landscape treatments, shade amenities, parking, lighting, and integrated art. On the materials matter section, we continually heard from the public that they are not fans of stucco and ephes. So it's really important that when people feel a connection to place and a sense of permanence, that we have buildings that are have human scaled materials, especially at the podium level. And they include brick, copper, and other metals, glass, steel, concrete, rammed earth, and a layered mix of exposed materials. So we also talk a lot about shade and multiple different forms of shade, not just organic shade, but structural shade, breeze blocks, and shaded public spaces throughout the downtown. The downtown section also did one thing unique this around. We took the work that we did with our early outreach and combined it with the work that the DTA did with the consultants from New York. And they went out and asked people the types of activities they would want to see in our public spaces downtown. And that was an effort to really think about the downtown as a network, that we think about how Beach Park connects all the way through downtown, through plazas and pocket parks, and connects ultimately to Burchett Park and the Gamage Curve. And we think about this as kind of one organism that supports walkability, the TOD, and ground floor businesses throughout the downtown. So we have the system of open spaces that are programmed and activated. All right, the lake and the Rio Salado and Town Lake anchor, as you know, is one of the fastest growing areas in the valley. So our consideration here is really how can we make the lake a point of departure? One of the things the lake suffers from is that it doesn't feel, it has many different individual parts. In some ways it doesn't function as a whole. So how can we use open spaces? How can we program the water's edge? How can we activate and utilize those spaces in a meaningful way that creates destination, a seamless destination of a patchwork of destinations? So one of the ways to do that, one of the most efficient ways to do that is through the role of art and light. So this section profiles other communities that have used art exhibitions using light as a medium, as well as ideas for specifically programming individual open spaces throughout the lake region, including the marina, Tempe Beach Park, as well as the kind of corporate quasi-public open spaces adjacent to businesses. All right, the ASU section, the Novus Innovation Corridor and ASU Campus, of course, is an ASU-led program. There are distinct, clear jurisdictional boundaries that need to be respected here. So one of the key visions, though, one of the piece that we have in common is that this area will be successful if we manage that connectivity to and through the entire area. And that's an argument for a character area plan as a whole. You know, when we think about Apache, the role of the neighborhoods and the boulevard are synonymous. How people get to and from the station areas, how Apache works. If we think of the downtown, that's even magnified on a higher scale in terms of the amount of light rail stations and future streetcar stops that we have throughout the area. So this plan will be successful if we can think about how that connectivity works, how the ground floor functions as a district. And certainly ASU has done a great job of leading the sustainability envelope. We hear from the neighbors a lot. That's a key consideration for them. So we can think about how they do everything from cantilevered buildings over public spaces to shading the west facade of buildings. There's a great list of examples they've included in downtown Phoenix as well as in Tempe that we can point to and hope that the work with the JRC will continue in that vein. All right, the appendices include 3 sections, A, B, and C. The first section, the community profile, is a list of demographics. It has area maps. We do an architectural summary of this area of the city. There's a recap, again, of the differences between guidelines and legal requirements. And also we profile our Think Extra Small Tempe campaign, which is basically kind of a form of tactical urbanism where we talk about getting the fine-grained detail right, really focusing on activation, programmatic elements. The section B, the community outreach, is a summary of all of our materials we used. It includes our dotocracies, photos of all of our meetups, the online survey results, and has this kind of a summary of all the work we've done. We included an infographic which has an analysis of, just at a snapshot, how many postcards we did, how many clicks we got, how many votes we had online, as a quick one-stop shop on that outreach effort. And this year we've also thematically grouped all of the public comments into section C. in the spirit of transparency. We've also grouped them by theme. So, and we've passed that information along to our consultants for the Urban Core Master Plan. So the section you'll see if you're, for example, looking at something about, streetscape design or public art, it's all grouped throughout that area. All right, so next steps. The public comment period, when we did the rollout for the fall, that was called the fall draft, and we had that open for public comment from October to December. We took the feedback from that fall draft and developed this final draft here, which we had posted live for public comment in April. Throughout that time period, we also visited the NAC, the Historic Preservation Commission, the DRC during a working session, the Municipal Arts and Culture Commission, and did periodic updates to City Council. And speaking of council, we plan on going to council for council resolution in June. And then once the document is finalized, we'll make that available online as well as distribute to the relevant boards and commissions. And as follow-up for the implementation piece, we'll be working on a compatibility matrix for evaluation. So say when a project is presented, staff, neighbors, boards and commissions can have a kind of abbreviated sheet of all of the placemaking principles, and at one glance can kind of get a sense of if the project is in alignment with the vision for the area, which includes the general plan, and make recommendations based on what we've heard from the public. So again, I want to thank the neighborhood stakeholders and the commissioners and staff that have been part of this process. It's included a lot of people over a 2-year period, and we owe a debt of thanks to those people. To recap character area planning as a whole, this work we're doing right now includes a total of 5 character areas now we've planned for. The character areas we have not yet planned for include North Tempe, Papago Park, which is number 1 in this map. We also have not planned yet for West Tempe, which is the area that includes the Diablo Double Butte area, Arizona Mills, all the way down to Emerald Center along the I-10 corridor. And council will be determining who's next and the order and timing of that. So just as planning work is never done, we are currently involved in planning efforts for the Urban Core Master Plan. And we have project manager Ambika Andikari here to give us, to take a moment to talk about the relevance of this plan and how the two are related.
Thank you, Anson. Madam Chair and Commission members, there are 2 elements that I wanted to briefly talk about. One is we received 3 written comments today during the afternoon, and 1 finally when we were just sitting down here. So there were 4 comments. I will very briefly address them, and I know there's going to be an opportunity for the public to speak. And later on, if you want us to respond, staff is here. And then, because this project is very well connected to the Urban Core Area Master Plan, and I talked on that plan a couple of weeks ago with this group, and some of the comments that we received from the people, from the public, also had some questions on that. I just wanted to highlight just a few things. One is the Urban Core Area Master Plan and the Character Area 3 are basically the same kind of boundaries, and they're also more or less some overlap towards the end, because the Character Area 3 planning is towards the end, and the Urban Core Area Master Plan is somewhere halfway through right now. Now, all plans are connected, especially these 2 plans are much more connected because they are the same kind of boundaries and there are many similarities. But I just wanted to highlight that the scope of these plans are somewhat different. They are connected, there is a complementarity, but also the emphasis is somewhat different. The Character Area 3 plan, just the way that Hansen described, goes into a lot more granular detail, much more generic in terms of the materials, in terms of the colors, in terms of the connectivity to the existing characters of the buildings and the area. Whereas the Urban Core Area Master Plan will go beyond that. It will look into the intensity, any possible densities, and also it has components of affordable housing and the TOD, which are more regulatory. Whereas the Character Area 3 plan is much more advisory, the Urban Core Area Master Plan will be both advisory and also it will have a regulatory component. The levels of generalities are also different. Whereas the Character Area Plan will be looking into much more minute details of the building and the character, the Urban Core Area Master Plan will be looking at the macro scale, where the growth can occur, all these numbers that we are talking about, where they can go. and what is going to be the connection between the neighborhood and the large-scale development that will take place. So there are some differences. Now, in terms of some of the public input that you received this morning, you might have some questions. We can respond to this early, or we can also respond to it after people have an opportunity to speak. But I just wanted to highlight just a couple of things. Even after we had finalized this draft, the last 5 months we've been refining this draft based on the public input. We've been meeting with the public, the neighborhood leaders, and some of the other leaders of the community, just to get their input and refine the plan. So the last 4 or 5 months, there have been many iterations of this plan that have come through, and we have tried to accommodate almost all of the comments that people have given. Sometimes you have to balance the comment because you get comments that might conflict with each other, but the vast majority of the comments from the residential leadership, I would say 90 or 95% of the comments have been met. We've taken a pain in going through the plans of the back, the previous plans, and what people have asked in terms of what we need to include, how many principles, what kind of pictures, how is it going to look, what kind of characteristic it is going to exhibit. And all of those things have been very painstakingly taken care of by the staff in this particular plan. The connectivity on the urban core, and this I just described that they are sort of independent. They emphasize 2 different elements from a different scale. The urban core area master plan will be concluded towards the end of this year, and anything that we've done in this character area plan has been provided as an input towards the urban core area master planning to the consultants and also to the staff. So they are complementary, they inform each other, the levels are different, the emphases are different. So some of those highlights of the comments today that we received, I just wanted to respond on a higher level. If there are any specific questions, we can respond to it now, or we can also wait until other people speak, and the staff is very prepared to respond to those questions. Any questions for me?
Yes, I appreciate the comments regarding how this relates to the downtown master plan. The other item that comes to mind was presented during a study session, and that was the Rio Salado, I believe it's Rio Salado master plan. Is that what it's called? Mm-hmm. Okay. So how are those integrated? How are those connected?
Actually, that's a very good question. Thank you for asking. So these are the 3 plans which are very, very well connected, but there are many other plans. We're doing transportation plan. They're like 50th Street plan. Many of the plans are connected. The Rio Salado Beach Park Master Plan is within the boundary of the Character Area 3 and also within the boundary of the Urban Core Area Master Planning. Again, the levels of those plans are different. Anytime we do a public consultation, we're trying to coordinate so that we don't ask the same question to the same group of people too many times, just to help the input process. All the workshop that we've done, we're trying to do it together in alignment. The Tempe Beach Park Master Plan is very specific for a very specific area, and where the shade can go, where the umbrellas can go, what kind of plants need to be planted, and what other amenities could be added to that beach park. The Urban Core Area Master Plan would be from the higher level of perspective in terms of where the densities can go and how the connectivities can occur. So staff, the project manager of the Beach Park Master Plan and the rest of the plans who are working in coordination altogether. And all of this is also being given as a feedback to the consultants.
Other questions of staff at this point? Commissioner Amorosi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As a matter, I've seen the previous character area plans, and I know they mix the residential with commercial aspects, but it seems in this plan, the other elements, the ASU, the downtown Mill Avenue, and the Tempe Beach Park are such huge entities that it seems like those 3 would overwhelm what's happening at the neighborhood level. Can't we do an area separation there?
That's a very good question.
Because there are 14 neighborhood associations and 16
Councilmember
HOAs.
Amorosi, that's an excellent question. Even the Apache corridor plan had a mix of some history, some commercial corridors, some transportation element, and some of the historic areas and the neighborhoods which are very single family, very well preserved neighborhood. But it was a smaller area. The plan was much more straightforward and simplified. Whereas this area, because the borders were defined by the council direction in the beginning, when you divide the character areas in the entire city into 8, you do have to lump some areas, because if you really begin to delineate every different characteristic, there will be like 60, 70 different character areas. So given all of that, the proximity of the downtown and the residential areas actually feed in each other in creating that kind of character. Because anytime you have a residential area very close to business and the downtown, the characteristic of that residential area is different than the suburban areas. So from that perspective, putting all of this and still dividing them into 4 different areas within one particular character area, dividing them into 4 sub character areas, I think was a very good way to do this plan, because they influence each other. Now, the historical characters, the way that the subdivisions were made, some of the historical individuals created this area, they all blend, whether it is downtown, whether it is the residential area, whether it is ASU or the downtown. So there is that level of connectivity, and when you look at the macro scale of the city of Tempe, I think it was pretty prudent to do this character area as one character area planning and still subdivide. So what we have done in this character area plan is there are some general principles that are area-wide, that are very common, very generic in terms of landscaping, in terms of building materials and so on. And then each one of the character areas have been gone into much more detail in proposing the guidelines for them. And because of the primacy of some of these residential areas, the Northwest neighborhood section has been pulled up front, and that is the richest. That has the maximum amount of principles and most numbers of pictures and descriptions and so on. And you talk about ASU, you're absolutely right. ASU is a different jurisdictional entity, but still it is connected to the downtown area. And we spend not a lot of time on the ASU section because there are other planning efforts that are going on which needs to be collaboratively implemented. Just this afternoon alone, there was a presentation on the Novus area, and we are very much aware of that. So this plan basically says that, hey, within this area, here is ASU Novus and ASU campus. This is how they're going to be connected. In terms of administering the plan, the GRC is going to take a look at the ASU, and the city of Tempe will take a look at the rest of the areas, but each one of them will be collaboratively informed with each other. So that's the way we try to make sense all of that, but that's an excellent question.
Madam Chair, just to elaborate briefly on it, from a planning standpoint, when we are looking at project-specific information, whether it's happening in the Novus corridor or whether it's downtown or whether, it has a trickle-down effect from circulation to traffic to everything else that is going into our neighborhood. So it was important for us to consider all it, because if we separate that out, there's less of a connectivity between those master plans now and the character defining things within this character area, which is a larger area. So from current planning too, that makes sense to evaluate all of those, what's happening, regardless of whether who's approving them, whether it's JRC approving it or DRC approving it or city council. They're all fair, connected from staff review perspective. We are doing a comprehensive review. So that's part of the reasoning also behind it.
Okay, so following up on that then, I noticed on page 23, section A3, it says see map on page XX, and it has to do with historic property. So then there's a map on page 28 that says historic properties, and then there's a map on page 33 that talks about historic properties. So I don't know which, the A3 section, how that's going to connect what priorities there are, because when I look at those other maps, I see circles and stars and squares based on if they're national registered, state registered, or whatever. But to the person that doesn't know, I think it would be better, even if it's in the appendices, that you actually explain what that circle or that star or that square is and what the address is. Because then a developer even could say, wow, there's 4 historic houses just on this one street alone. Whereas if they just look at a bunch of dots and circles, that point doesn't come through, because that definitely is a priority for this area that no other neighborhood has. And I know you address it in the on page 23, but you don't specifically call it out, which would be important to the neighborhood.
We will take care of that. There is actually a legend on that map that describes some of those dots, but you're absolutely right. We can go into a little more detail. Maybe the map could be larger because we're tackling a very large area. So when you put a dot on a very small scale of map, it does kind of, bleeds into it, but that's something that we can fix.
One other question. In the Appendix A, it talks about neighborhood tapestry, and I don't understand. It looks like that's just a generic campus town breakdown. I don't think that's specific to this area, because I don't see anyone over the age of 30 mentioned in that tapestry.
There is actually a source on that tapestry. That is one of the things that these groups are doing in trying to identify different groups of people in different typologies within a city. And because this area obviously is composed of students and close proximity to downtown, and then some of the town and gown type of thing. So that was put in the appendix just to give a flavor on identifying what kind of characteristic from socioeconomic perspective, from the demographic perspective, this area might show. But you're right, that's generic, that's taken up from somewhere else, just to give us a reference that when you read that, you will be able to sort of connect it to what's going on in this area. That was the only purpose.
I don't get that.
It can even be taken out. That's not central to the plan.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Deborah Zajac. I've lived in Tempe now for 24 years, and I don't live in this character area. I am in a character area that has not been gotten to yet, but I have attended the character area meetings for some of them that have done, just to get a feel, as an observer, to get a feel of the process. And my concern is, I see that a lot of city effort, staff time effort is put into, these character area plans. And I do believe that people involved, like Hanson, are very sincere in what they're trying to do with the neighbors. My concern is, and this was mentioned by Hanson and the other gentleman who were up speaking, is that we have to be very careful, because there's things like guidelines and there's laws. And I'm just concerned with all the different plans going on between ASU, the urban core, this character area plan, the transportation overlay district, that the things that the residents want in the neighborhoods is going to be a lower priority when it comes to determining what is really happening in the neighborhoods. So I just wanted to share that, and because it was emphasized, in both gentlemen said, there's the idea of guidelines and laws. And I remember when the 2040 plan just was developed, there were just voted on and approved. Within that year, within months, there were developers coming up in front of the DRC. It was different commissioners, some of you, but they were already presenting things that passed through staff that were 2 and 3 times density. So people don't always listen to what's written down on the paper. So that's my main concern. So thank you. That.
Thank you. My name is Darlene Justice. I've lived in Tempe over 50 years. I don't live in the neighborhood that's in this character area. I live across the pond in North Tempe. And I'm here today because even though I live across Tempe Town Lake, I'm very interested in the historic preservation and designation of our historic neighborhoods. And Maple Ash and the whole area surrounding it, the greater Maple Ash, has some of our most historic homes. I was also co-founder of the Tempe Historic Preservation Foundation, and I'm still on that board and that. And I'm speaking today for myself, though, and I really think that what I think needs to happen is they've done this plan with everybody, ASU and the lake and the neighborhood and that. I think that for the neighborhood, that's a good first start. And if they want to move everything over but the neighborhood or the neighborhood as it is, but they need to go back and do the job right in this neighborhood. We need to really protect our history. We need to protect the neighbors in this area. This group of neighbors has actually applied for historic designation on their own because they couldn't do it by the whole district. They've done down zoning to protect their homes later so that other people can't tear down those beautiful historic homes. They have incorporated art throughout their neighborhoods. They're way ahead of a lot of us in other regions with things that they've already done. And I know that they've been asking for consideration that their history be properly documented, and that they're even trying to get together like the Arcadia group, where they call themselves Arcadia, and there's different neighborhood associations in that. They're talking about the greater Maple Ash. And this incorporates quite a few neighborhoods that are still getting irrigation and have historic homes. I think that it would be quite sad to move this forward and say that it was done properly for the neighborhoods in this area. If you look at what was done in Alameda and the other neighborhood, there's a lot more history that was documented, a lot more photographs. And man, if there aren't photographs in this neighborhood, this region, this needs to all be documented for all of us in Tempe, not just the neighbors that live there. So I please implore that you think about that and send it back and ask them to finish the job, because it's not been done as far as this neighborhood. And I do agree that these other areas are overpowering. They've done a good job on that. Those people are planning. This neighborhood is trying to maintain what we have. And so I really implore you to think hard about that. Phil, you know the neighborhoods. You guys all do. Please help us with this. Thank you.
Evening, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. For the record, my name is Philip Yates, President for the Riverside Neighborhood Association. We feel this plan will give permission for developers to build more projects that the neighborhood do not want. We feel the plan will create more easier for developments to be pushed through the City Council and the DRC. We feel that the character area should not lump the residential areas such as Maple Ash, Mitchell Park, Riverside, Sunset with ASU and Rio Salado. Grouping residential areas with non-residential areas will further expand ASU and a larger scale development to creep into the residential areas. These need to be separate. Character Area 3 gives very little history to the neighborhoods, unlike Apache and Alameda. What about mentioning Susan Harder, who was responsible for preserving many homes within the community? She was one of the pioneers of Tempe preservation and also started the very first Sunset and Riverside neighborhood associations. Character Area 3 did not have as many pictures as the others did. We want a design that fits the historical characteristics of the Tempe downtown. There are no references to lower income housing that is present within the Riverside neighborhood and Sunset neighborhoods. It is a city's plan to sweep through and under the rug all of these neighborhoods. Lower income housing should be defended and preserved. Does anybody have any questions? No? Thank you.
Chair and Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening. I have the privilege of living and drinking in Character Area 3. I find it quite enjoyable. I find Hanson's work really incredible, trying to comprehensively synthesize the creative research and outreach, trying to find a way to summarize all the things that happen in the area that I live, and educating people along the way about the nature of a guideline compared to laws or the ordinances that we have in place is really amazing. It's an incredible effort. It is exciting and challenging to live so close to the orbit of downtown and ASU. It generates a lot of activity and interest that go in the neighborhood, part of why I'm drawn to live there. At the same time, it's very easy to be overlooked as a neighborhood as a result of being there. And so, for example, on University Drive, we have over 25 restaurants in a quarter-mile strip, mostly supported by the neighborhoods. Mom and pop, not huge chains, few chains are in there, but it's a great little core of restaurants that sort of has an energy going all of its own. It's very easy for that to get dwarfed by what goes on downtown because we can't compete with all of that, but it is a neighborhood core that is interesting all on its own, separate and distinct from downtown. And love that things like this, I hope, would support sort of that core and emphasize that core. We have the same thing going on Broadway in a little bit different way. It supports the lunchtime crowd of the industrial to the south of it, and it's starting to get its own character and uniqueness there, as well as areas developing along First Street. And so we have commercial within our neighborhoods separate and distinct from our larger adjacency to an urban core. With that, I would love those distinct pieces to stand out in those pieces. I'm not sure how to do that in addition with everything else. I've had the opportunity to use the Apache core, the Apache character area plan with my clients and try to explain what character area is and how that looks, and I find it to be very helpful. It's a great summary of trying to bring someone up to speed on an area of Tempe in a very quick way. I do have concerns that with the master plan going on in downtown, with ASU's master plan going on currently, that those could be a lot of conflicts between those documents and this one. I appreciate staff's efforts to keep them coordinated, but as they have different approval processes, I'm worried we might end up with a little bit of dissonance at the end, and would appreciate if there was time so that they could kind of finish all together in the next few months. With that, I do hope that we could separate the neighborhoods in character area 3A or something of that sort from the three cores. I'm concerned that the downtown finish cohesively, and I'm concerned that ASU, even though it's great to include them in the master plan and guide how the connectivity would work, and I'm not sure that the master plan has any sway over those boards or that setting, and so it seems odd to include something if it really has, it doesn't have authority, but it has no influence in those sort of settings. But at a whole, really love the effort. Thank you.
Karen Gitlis, Chair of the Maple Ash Neighborhood Association and immediate past president of Tempe Historic Preservation Foundation, and currently an officer. Good evening. I apologize for my late response to you on this plan and that you have not had time to review my comments prior to this hearing. And I'm having a major computer malfunction, and that was actually not the revision that I meant to send, and this is not the revision I had to read. At this point, I want to make it clear that there have been major revisions and additions and improvements over the 3 drafts of this plan that are making it a better plan. This neighborhood section was incomplete upon the first draft release, and it is becoming better and better, but it is not yet finished. There are 5 neighborhoods of the 14 included in the neighborhood section of this plan that are in serious need of planning attention and have been for many years. This is not new information. So why are we rushing to finish this plan? I'm not joking. 2 years seems like a long time for one of these plans, but the fact is that this is 4 plans: downtown Tempe, the Rio Salado, ASU, and the Northwest neighborhoods. The neighborhood piece has not been properly or comprehensively addressed. When the first draft was published last fall, as I mentioned, the neighborhood section was incomplete. Responses to each of 3 drafts has fleshed this plan out and improved it vastly, but there is still more to be done. These neighborhoods include some of the most significant historical cultural resources existing in Tempe, including being the original town site, part of the original town site. This area continues to be one in which contention over development projects exists. This plan is important in that it will feed into the urban core master plan, which will be regulatory. This is not reassuring to any of us. The process is moving too fast. It deserves more attention than the summer rubber stamp series of meetings. I respectfully request on behalf of Maple Ash, Greater Maple Ash, the Riverside and the Sunset neighborhoods, and Campus Homes that you please send this incomplete plan back to the drawing board. And Trevor had a great idea. Pull the neighborhoods out and push forward the 3 big components. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Catherine Mancini, and I've lived in Tempe for 50 years now. Half of those years, or 25, I've lived in the downtown area. And I was along with Karen Gitlis on the first planning committee meeting 2 years ago. And at that time, we were thinking that this would be a little bit more geared toward the neighborhoods, even though I know it's a large character area. Because of that and because of all the other parts of that are very complex, hoping that we would get a little bit more airplay, so to speak. In particular, we were rushed through a lot of the drafts. I didn't actually see the final draft until last night. That is dated, I believe, the 14th of May, which is just last week, I think. And in that regards, I wanted to thank Hansen for all of the amazing work that he's put into this. I do recognize that 100%. I do not see and hear, in fact, he added a lot of the historical sections that I requested because the historical section was literally like 3 sentences in the very beginning. But I don't see where we're talking about current neighborhood, and where the section that talks about neighborhood tapestry is very generic. And I think that we should touch on what we really are and who we really are and say something about that. Who is the neighborhood? And again, it doesn't really give a lot of examples. Going down onto page 23, nothing is mentioned about some of the neighborhoods. It just keeps saying Daly Park, Mitchell Park, and they have these repetitive areas that aren't really completely covering the neighborhoods. And then the other part being in the dotocracy sections. In the very back, the appendix, there's so much bits and pieces of data, and it's literally just listed and listed and listed and listed, and I don't think anybody's really going to take a look at that. I feel like that should have been synthesized into something more visual, maybe some graphs saying 10 people like fountains, 20 people like statues, that sort of thing. And so I just wanted to add those critiques in, and I feel that it does need a little bit more work and tweaking, especially on the neighborhood side. And we would like to also see the term that the neighbors came up with, which is Greater Maple Ash, mentioned somewhere in the document. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on this? Would you, before you please fill out a card, please?
Hi. Hello, I'm Justin Stewart. I'm the current chair of the Mitchell Park Neighborhood Association. I want to thank you, the commissioners and the chair tonight, for letting me come up here and speak and give a few thoughts on this Character Area 3 plan. First off, I want to thank city staff for the exhausting last 2 years that they've put into this plan and the efforts that they've put in, the time they've taken to meet with various stakeholders, including neighborhoods and neighborhood leaders. It's been a lot of work. It's been a long 2 years. I can tell you personally, it's been a long 2 years. So I also want to acknowledge the neighborhood leaders that have attended, tons of autocracies, city-sponsored meetups, neighborhood association meetings, and numerous feedback that has been given over the last 2 years. There's been a lot of work on both sides, and I'm sure there's been a lot of work on sides that I'm not even privy to, and with other stakeholders such as business leaders, ASU, and people like that. But I do want to say, as the chair of the Mitchell Park Neighborhood Association, I'm just following up with the request that I sent out yesterday to reinsert the once drafted Greater Maple Ash description page. Staff worked closely with Maple Ash, Wilson Arts and Garden, and myself over the last 6 months to get that description page finished and put into the Character Area plan. And we worked really hard on it, and I really just think it's time to, it was in the original first draft of the plan, and I'd just really like to see it reinserted to help give a little bit of extra protection, a little bit extra notice of this fragile geographic area. I'm not looking to start a new neighborhood association, a new neighborhood group. I'm just asking for 3 neighborhoods in a specific geographical area that's has commonalities to be included. The piece was really well written. It was really well done. It took a lot of city staff words intermingled with what was wanted, what was given from the neighbors, and I thought, Karen Gitless did a great job of putting over 20 years of effort and work into helping Hanson come together with a well-crafted 1 or 2 pages describing the Greater Maple Ash. I'm not here to sink the ship today. I'm not here to say we should just throw out Character Area 3. I appreciate all the hard work that we've done the last 2 years, but I am here to encourage this document to be reinstated and to gain an extra sail for this ship, and for Tempe to have a smooth journey into the future and be able to use this plan as intended and as city staff sees it and as council is intending to use it in the future to help guide how to guide development and also how to protect the neighborhoods, and so we can all coincide together. Thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and give you a chance to respond if you'd like.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we really appreciate all the inputs because planning is always basically from the people. So we've been meeting with them. All the comments that they gave today right here, also something that we have thought through. We have, this plan actually has been going on almost 2.5 years. And like I said before, the last 5-6 months have been just basically revising it. This plan hasn't been rushed. I have worked in other cities. This kind of area plans typically get done maybe a year and a half. This is a very active community, so maybe about 2 years is a very good amount of time to do this kind of plan. This is an advisory plan. This is not regulatory. This is not giving any densities. This is not giving any heights. So it's a good plan for the community. From what they have asked, we have tried to accommodate almost everything. With this plan, it will be easier for the communities to ask for the design characteristics and design quality that they so well deserve. And they have provided majority of them, and which is incorporated into the plan. Now, in terms of the, I talked about some of those elements earlier, but one of the questions that came right now was the naming of the Greater Maple Ash area. Now, we have very carefully written, because there are many neighborhoods, like 16, in the character area 3 boundaries. The way that we've written is we have taken a note of what are the characteristics, which are the most important characteristics, the historical characteristics, the flood irrigation type of characteristic, the proximity to ASU, the development pressure that is coming from other areas. Those 5 or 6 we have mapped. You looked at those maps. And we built on that, and in our writing, we have actually named the Maple Ash, Wilson Art and Garden, and even Mitchell Park, that they have the highest concentration of some of these characteristics and parameters. Now, as the name suggests, this plan is a character area planning. So we have extracted the character that we think represents the most of all of those areas, because those are common to like other neighborhoods too. And we've also identified the area where there's the highest concentration of that, and we've named that. So I think we've done as much justice as had to be done, and given respect to the people's input from that perspective. Some minor things that the commission members and other people suggested about the neighborhood tapestry, that was taken out as a reference from somewhere else. That can be taken out. Maybe we can describe in one paragraph very specific type of demography of this area. In some ways, that is already there. There has been some description of the age and the racial breakdown and other demographic characteristics. So if you have some specific questions, I'll be happy to answer, but we have accommodated almost everything that we were able to do. Unless any of the staff wants to add anything at all.
Questions, Commissioner Brown?
I just want to make sure I understand completely where we stand. You're saying, and you're repeating what I think I've heard a few times, this is a guideline, this is not. So properties that are in a neighborhood are at this time protected to some extent by zoning criteria and so forth, and none of this takes that away, correct?
This takes nothing away. As a matter of fact, we did give an opportunity for voluntary downzoning to a group of people because they wanted voluntary downzoning as one of the way to protect it. It doesn't really impact any of the zoning. All it does is it gives you additional layer of advisory guidelines. The way that we use it as a staff, if someone proposes a new project in the area, we take this guideline, like Mr. Trevor Barber was saying, we take these guidelines and try to check the boxes that it does meet the material, the aesthetic guidelines, the shading guidelines, the landscaping guidelines. So actually it helps and protects the neighborhood from that perspective.
Yes, I almost sense the emails came in today that were forwarded to us, and they were kind of interesting to read. I appreciate the passion which everyone speaks. And it almost seems like they just want recognition. And I think we all recognize the importance of the neighborhoods. I don't think anyone in this room wants the neighborhoods to go away or be rolled over by concrete towers. They may feel that way, but there are some boundaries, and things are worked out to some extent. So I just want to know if it would make everyone who spoke tonight happy if there was a paragraph or two or a page or two that says, by the way, here's some neighborhoods that are nearby. I know it's not going to be written by committee, otherwise we'd never finish this thing. But is there going to be pain if we say take 1 month to give the neighborhoods a little more definition in their words, perhaps? But I don't think that'll take away from any of the work that you have accomplished, and it is a terrific piece of work. And I would agree. I mean, this started a couple years ago. I recall attending to a few meetings. So maybe it's just the last minute feeling that people were surprised that all of a sudden here's the draft and it doesn't have that paragraph that they want to see. Do I sense? Does anyone else feel there's a sense perhaps of just a little more editing? Is that going to cause a problem?
Well, and that was the question I was going to ask, because this is the first time we've had opposition. So there's a reason for that. And if it needs more explanation, I have kind of the same feeling that the neighbors have a motion or all of them together. And I understand we've got other projects. This is for planning purposes. But if we need more pictures to define the character, what difference that makes. It does seem like that there was more time devoted to residential in the other character areas, I understand, because there's more, that's basically what the other character areas are. But in terms of this is not a huge area, but it's a huge concentration. And I think that some of the things that have been addressed, I would like to see something that talked about affordable housing and what can we do to preserve single-family homes. Neighborhoods in this area seem to be eaten up with multifamily housing. So, I mean, giving some primacy to the history of this neighborhood and hopes of preserving the character. Vice Chair Lyon.
I share a lot of the same thoughts, and I will back up and say I think the work that you've all done is excellent. But I share the sentiment that you've done this great job of documenting quantifiable things that can be measured or can be quantized, yes or no. It's got flood irrigation, those things. But I think it's some of these intangible things that are an important aspect of the character of those neighborhoods. These people are fiercely devoted to their neighborhood, and there are reasons for that. And I don't know that that comes through in the document as such. So maybe if there could be a bit more care devoted to why these people are so fiercely devoted to this area. I mean, I think even if there was just a page that just talked about what's neat about these neighborhoods, that would help convey, oh, there's something really special about this, let's pay attention.
Chair, members of the board, just to add a little bit to the discussion, I would ask that you be very specific in directing us as to what to go back and do, because what I've heard is very general, and I think we're at the nexus of the point there. We feel that we've done what you've described, and the neighbors want a little different. So there's two fundamental issues here. One is whether the neighborhoods should even be with the other areas. And I think emphatically that they should be. I think if you do a plan, you start at the middle and radiate out, you don't lop it off in the middle. And frankly, if you take downtown and ASU and Mill and University and cut that off right there, you're at the heart of things and dissecting it in a way that I don't think makes a lot of sense. I think if we did that same type of division with our urban core master plan, these neighbors would find that they don't get the protection that that plan hopefully will offer. And I will say on the record, if there's some fear of development, as Mr. Brown mentioned, that plan is going the direction of the opposite. It's leaning towards saying, look, if you've got some zoning, you've got some zoning, but just go develop somewhere else. I mean, I don't want to stand up here now or at that plan or any time between now and then and have to argue as to why we should build 3 or 4 stories in Maple Ash when we have other developable places to do that. So if that's a concern, and I could understand why it would be, I think we're headed the right direction. And I've implored them to allow the plan that can actually be regulatory to be regulatory. I sense that they still are asking that of this plan, and it's just not possible. So I'm afraid at that point we're going to come up wanting at the end, no matter what we've changed. So the other issue is this nomenclature of Greater Maple Ash. And I will say, in an effort to be abundantly helpful, my staff did put that language in the plan. The documentation that was done at that point is still in this plan. The word greater is gone. All the things that it enumerated in terms of what's important are all there. And matter of fact, they're better now. We've improved them. As was mentioned, the last 6 months and really a year has been all in editing this plan based on a few very dedicated neighbors, and it has improved it. And that area is there and is improved. I have 2 concerns or issues with just the word greater and renaming that. As Mr. Lyon said, we did a great job of identifying what's there, and we've mapped it, and we mapped it all together. And it's great stuff like flood irrigation and historic properties and all these things that you saw and that Hanson talked about a half hour, an hour ago. And when we mapped it, that boundary just didn't really hang together anymore. Maple Ash has more of that than any place, and we tried to say that really clearly. And then it immediately starts tapering off to the west. And if you start to try and define where those features happened the most often, you would really have a bit of a plot map all over this area. Again, as Hansen indicated, that's what makes this area interesting. So I have a factual issue with that. If you all find that there's other reasons to do it, that's fine. You can say as much and advise us going forward. The second thing is that we have a really good system in the city of Tempe for recognizing neighborhoods and neighborhood groups. It's much more robust than most places, frankly, but it's organized. And this would not be an organized way of recognizing neighborhoods differently. So we can, with this board's direction, we can start tomorrow. I can reach out with my neighborhood folks and we can start organizing the process that would reach out to these 3 neighborhoods and say, do you want to be also recognized? I'm not saying you have to wipe away what exists, but to also be recognized in this other way. And for whatever purpose they would deem that necessary, they could go through that process. And whether we think it does anything or changes anything wouldn't even really be relevant. But for the purpose of this plan, I don't think it does do or change anything. We've recognized all the features that are important. And Mr. Lyon, if there are other things we're missing, you would have to be more specific because, like you said, they're harder to put your finger on, and we would have a hard time putting our finger on them. So at this point, I believe this is far and away a better character area plan than we've had up till now. The neighborhood plan in and of itself has more information, more guidance in it than any of the other previous character area plans. And Amika mentioned, I think the fact that we did take this plan and then break it down within the plan is testament to the fact that, yes, there are a lot of things going on, but they need to remain together because they are going to remain together geographically, and all the impacts are going to remain together as we discuss them going forward. But I would ask that if you do want us to come back, we come back very quickly. At some point, this is going to lag, and frankly, my staff's attention has to turn to other things, and the other plan that is definitely going to be coming up and definitely going to be providing regulation and a little greater depth of impact rather than the design issues that this does. And Chair Spears, I would say about the last thing you mentioned about the housing, that effort does that. This is design, which really isn't so much about the housing. The development aspects, and I think what we've said here about the housing being important and the maintenance of it helps it a very little bit. But the fact that you provide, or whether you provide affordable housing, I think is a different issue than design and much more appropriate for that effort. And we really have a robust piece going on. We have an entirely separate consultant focused on that housing piece. Our human services people and those housing folks are very engaged. So, thank you.
Yeah, so I just want to, I don't know exactly where to start, but I've lived in this character area for 20 years. I've lived in different neighborhoods in this character area. I lived in Daly Park, I lived in Campus Homes, I lived in downtown. And there's a few things that I've learned over that time, and what I think is I do not think that we should be separating this out into different character areas. I think this is all a very integrated area. The neighborhoods are very integrated with the downtown and with ASU, and I think it should be contained in one character area. I think it's within our capabilities to do so, and I think the character area plan so far is very representative of all those areas. And another thing I've learned in meeting a lot of different people in the neighborhoods in this area is that the neighborhoods do have a very strong voice, and the city does listen to those voices. There's a huge history of activism, so I don't necessarily worry that the neighborhood's voice has not been heard. Maybe this isn't 100% to what the neighborhoods would prefer to have, but what I would prefer in seeing the pace of development in this character area is to have something like this available to us as a tool to provide that guidance for materials, for landscaping, for sustainable infrastructure, for these different things that are very, very important for this area and we don't have something like this yet. And so I think if we put it off, how long is that going to take? If it is put off, I think it should be a very defined time frame and we shouldn't be waiting another year to get this in place. I think it's a really good product, and I'm very supportive of it. And I think it's a lot of great work, and a lot of effort has been put into this by a lot of different people, by the neighborhoods, by the city staff. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Weaver, if what I was hearing from the neighbors, okay, so if you have an issue with the name Greater Maple Ash, and we take that headline out of there, it seemed like the neighbors still said there were 2 to 4 pages of what they thought was important to the neighborhoods that was taken out. Why can't those be reinserted? Because those are the elements of what they thought were important and not necessarily the name Greater Maple Ash.
Commissioner, you have a page number here. Can I see the page number here? This is 23. This is what that page was. If there's anything in there specifically that you want added, again, I would just ask that you be very specific. But all the information was still there. The heading got changed. The heading is what we, in retrospect, decided was not appropriate. Information there is still in the plan. In fact, has been, again, I would say bolstered, because when we kept hearing this desire, I think as somebody mentioned, to be recognized, I asked my staff, and they repeatedly beefed it up to say, look, recognize what's there. What's actually there, recognize it. Call it out, be specific. Mention that maple ash proper has the highest concentration of this by far, and that makes it unique. And I think we've done that in these pages. So if there's something that is lacking specifically that we said about how great something is, and we didn't say that anymore, tell us, and we can put that back in. It's really, for us, it was not about any of the substance of that. It was just about the name, which we think would be more appropriate for a different process if they really want to pursue that. So,
okay, thank you.
Andrew, I couldn't have said it better than what you said earlier. That's kind of my feelings also. I read what we received and heard the testimony from the neighbors tonight, and I agree there is probably lots of room to wordsmith the heck out of this document, and we may never get on to the next character area. This burns a lot of limited staff resources. We've already spent longer on this character area plan than probably most communities would have. And I think we're to the point where we're letting great get in the way of good. You know, we've all heard that kind of concept that we could wordsmith this thing and beat ourselves up over it to get it a little bit better. And in the meantime, this commission and the city council will continue to make development decisions on a multitude of projects that are in the pipeline now without the benefit of a character area 3 document to fall back on. We've been clamoring as a commission for something like this for a while. Developers would love to have the guidance that a document like this could give them in planning future projects. If we put the brakes on this, it's going to do more harm than good, in my opinion, because I don't have something like this to read and understand and give direction to when we're making these decisions that we make every other Tuesday. So it's a living document. If we put this thing out into the public, that's not to say that 6 months from now, someone can't say, hey, you know what, here's an idea of how to make it better. We can continue to edit something like this. This isn't the 2040 plan that is once it's there, it's there. So I'd like to see us move this thing forward. That doesn't mean it can't improve between now and June 7th or whenever the council sees it. If there's some easy things that can be pointed out and improved upon, great. But I personally don't feel like this should be the spot where we stop the wheels in motion. I would prefer to let it keep moving forward through the process.
And I was going to say, I saw Hanson sitting there taking notes, and I do think there were relevant points came up, and hopefully those could be worked gives you a couple of weeks to do that. I think that, again, I'm going to trust your judgment. I'm not crazy about Greater neighborhood because there are very different character areas outside of Maple Ash. And if through a different process you decide that's the name you want to be, I think that can be accomplished through that, through something other than this process. Vice Chair Lyon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to just agree with the idea of not separating out the areas. Nighttime, daytime are part of one day. They affect each other. If you separate it out, you're saying these two things don't affect each other. I think that's the opposite of what you want. I think you want them in the same area. I would say, previous to anyone else's comments, my suggestion would be write one additional page, which if someone from out of town reads this, they'll say, oh, that's why I should go visit one of these neighborhoods. What are the historical, here's this interesting thing happened here, and this home, and this thing. I mean, just a flavor piece. You have so much great information, but the problem is it's too concise, it's too brief, and it's easy to blow past that and not feel the importance of this, right? I mean, there are a lot of designers that can say, okay, checklist, I have to have these items, blah, blah, blah. But good designers are also going to be able to feel, oh, that's why you're excited about your neighborhood? So I would say it deserves a one-page flavor piece. This is why it's great. Other than that, I think it's a great piece of work.
I completely agree with some of the recent comments and appreciate all the passion and the feedback from the neighborhoods. We are about to move forward with this plan, whether it's in a month or in a year, and this thing will live for a long time after this. We deal with zoning and planning and other issues all the time, and this stuff is complicated. And we've got, if you're just a map guy, you've got the city map, you got the general plan and designation, you've got, I mean, you leave the power district and everything else aside, school districts. To add a new layer in there that has no standing or formal approval process, I just don't know how we do that, and if we do, where we stop. So I guess that's the concern that I've got with adding a new name that I'm not familiar has any formal standing. The other concern I've got is the more time we focus on something like this, which is important, the less time we spend on something that has teeth, which I don't think this thing does. So I'm happy to move forward with this and would support it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One other question to staff. I'm sorry I didn't bring this up earlier, and I do appreciate your Herculean effort on this whole thing. It's excellent. But on page 32, you talk about assessment reports and expanding classifications, and I wanted to know if those were like wish list things or if there's actual time frames on those. Are those active reports that are happening, or is it something?
Let me read the exact language so I can answer your question best. Okay, page 32?
32.
All right. So, okay, the Building Condition Assessment Report, a BCAR. So typically when the city acquires a property, we go through a BCAR. I'll use the example of the Eisendrath House. So when it was privately held, it converted to city ownership. One of the first things we did was a BCR to figure out what we have. At that point, we figured out we had a leaky roof, and the number one item of preservation for that was a temporary foam roof to prevent water damage from seeping into the adobe. We have the same situation with maybe the soon-to-be acquired adobe on First Street, which has been in legal dispute. And so the effort here is a BCR basically outlines the key considerations of what condition the building is in, and then it prioritizes what needs to happen first. So in the case of adobe, it's repairing, water damage, stabilizing. And then in the case of flour mill, it would be, safety, access, and then later adaptive reuse, and then considerations for site planning for a mixed-use project. So it basically creates the raw data that all of the PAD or future applications hinge on, or a preservation plan in the case of Eisendrath.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, I'll entertain a motion. Commissioner Brown.
Madam Chair, I move that this be approved with the request for a one-page flavor piece to be done in 2 weeks, if that's feasible.
Go directly to council, doesn't come back to us.
Correct.
Is there a second? Go ahead.
How would you feel about, instead of saying 2 weeks, which I think might be a rush job, we specify that it's to be added at a certain time when it's ready, that one-page piece is expected,
I think it's
At some future
scheduled to
date.
go to council in 2 weeks.
and it has to be 100% finished at that time?
I think so.
Withdrawn.
It's been moved by Commissioner Brown and seconded by Commissioner Amorosi to approve character area 3 with the addition of a one-page flavor to be presented to council on the scheduled date. All those in favor? Opposed? And that passes 6-1 with Commissioner Sumner in dissent. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is commission member announcements. Is there anything? From commission? If not, then staff announcements.
Madam Chair, would you like me to repeat the agenda items? For the June 12th meeting, we have a preliminary plat subdivision plat for townhomes for Treble located on 1061 West 5th Street. Use permit and a DPR for Heinz Mini Warehouse Rental Storage Facility at 8575 South Priest Drive. A rezoning use permit and DPR for Broadway Apartments at 1980 East Broadway. A request for general plan amendment, rezoning, PAD, and a DPR for Tempe Crossroads at 1010, 1044 East Orange Street, and a request for zoning map amendment, PAD, and a use permit with development plan review for Millennium at Rio Salado, located on 2110 East Rio Salado Parkway.
I shouldn't use flavor piece. I should have said recognition. I did it because you said it. And it's a great.
No,
thing. But this.